actors. By the way, can I say one other thing related point, Michael? When I and my colleagues work with if we're going to work with a school, just say with young people in a school, and you could say this is also for youth programs of various kinds. The first thing to do is not work with the young people. It's to work with the adults who work with the young people. And so one of the dynamics that has to be focused on when you're working with adults who work with young people is not their relationship to the young people, it's their relationship to each other. So for example, think about the youth workers as themselves having a peer culture, having behavior and attitudes that they themselves have, and that the way they interact with their peers. So for example, if you're a 26-year-old guy and you're a youth worker, and you work with 14-year-olds, you also have other 26-year-olds and 27-year-olds and 25-year-olds, men and women and others in your own spheres, both personally and professionally. How do you interact with them? And how do your attitudes and beliefs shape the way that you interact with them? Because until you figure out how you are acting in your own peer culture, you're not going to be as effective in helping young people navigate their own peer culture relationships, their own identities, their own thinking about manhood or womanhood or beyond. You follow me? But I think a lot of adults, including youth workers, themselves are a little bit anxious about that because it means that they have to look introspectively about their own attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. But if you're going to ask a 14-year-old to do that, and you're not going to do it yourself, isn't that a little hypocritical? And in fact, in some ways, the 14-year-old has even more pressure on him or her or them to conform to certain kinds of norms than you do. You still have pressure on you. I mean, let's be honest. Peer pressure. Sometimes people think about peer pressure as a function of adolescence, but I long ago understood peer pressure is a lifelong process. People have pressures on them to conform to certain kinds of norms within their peer culture throughout their life. I mean, maybe some people who are really, really on the older side of the spectrum are like, I don't care anymore what anyone thinks. But I think that's the exception. And so, for example, I work with adult men, in powerful positions. I mean, I work with young people too, but powerful men in, business and politics and community leadership and religious leadership. Those adult men, and again, many of them are, embodying the most powerful sort of white male authority, themselves are filled with anxiety when it comes to thinking critically about how their attitudes and beliefs about women, for example, about sex or sexuality, might be under the critical spotlight in a way that it hasn't been for centuries, right? A lot of men are really anxious about this. Now, imagine if powerful adult men are anxious. Imagine 14-year-old boys or 16-year-old boys who are every day looking over their shoulder constantly. How am I supposed to act? What's cool? What's going to get me some status? What's going to be not? What's going to look attractive to girls? What's going to look unattractive? I mean, the point is that for teachers and adults and parents and others to be effective with young people, we have to be really strong enough and courageous enough to be introspective and think about ourselves and our own attitudes and beliefs. And then we can go out and be more effective working with young people.
I think that's the point, isn't it, Jackson? That if we're going to engage with young people, we are going to come up against some quite challenging topics and issues. But if we don't start reflecting and doing that critical reflection about our own attitudes, our own value, but also our own behaviors, it remains then that we're expecting young people in a way to kind of engage with this and solve this whenever we're not comfortable to do it. And I know in my work, and doing sex education, health and relationships education, I think the fundamental is about actually what are we engaging with in young people, and are we asking the right questions, and are we having the right conversations? And Michael, you've been party to me whenever I've been presenting in the past, and I'm very upfront in the work that I do is to saying that sex should be pleasurable and sexual relationships should be pleasurable. And that, a question I always ask to parents whenever I work with them is, would you like your young people as they grow up to be having the most mind-blowing, amazing, positive sex? Or would you like them to be having really violent, coercive, unpleasurable sex? And the shock on parents' faces. And I understand that's a shocking question, but I think that's the fundamentals. Do we want our young people to be growing up having positive, healthy, mutually respectful, pleasurable relationships, or we would like them to be full of violence and coercions? And I think those are some of the difficult questions that we have to start having. And I see in the sidebar, there's lots of in the chats where you all are talking about the difficulty in schools in engaging with some of these issues. And the difficulty as well is that, you know, people are saying you're trying to have these conversations with young people about pleasure, you know, about responsibility, but actually they're happening in contexts and places which very often are like microcosms of misogyny and attitudes within our culture. You know, picking up what you said earlier, it's about that systemic change that we need, not just individual action. So I think, you know, it's about how can we create some of these really challenging conversations and actually engage in the fundamentals that we need to be looking at in order to address gender-based violence, and not, and sometimes I think, myself included in the past, but I think sometimes we like to choose the easier topics to address, and we just hope that somebody else will pick up on the difficult ones that need to be covered, that lie underneath it all.